$200 billion vanished overnight. Gone. Poof. Like it never existed. That's how brutal the market reacted when Trump announced his new tech tariffs, targeting some of the biggest names in Silicon Valley and beyond. Apple, Nvidia, Intel. Hit. Stocks plummeted. Investors panicked. And the ripple effects, they're just starting to crash into the global economy. But how did we get here? And why would a single policy change cause this much destruction, this fast? In this video, we're breaking down the new Trump tariffs that just torched the tech sector. We'll show you why these new taxes on Chinese imports are completely reshaping the tech industry, where $200 billion in value disappeared overnight, and what this could mean for the next wave of innovation, AI, chips, and beyond. Because this isn't just a Wall Street story. This is about your phone, your job, your data. The tech that powers everything from your Uber ride to national defense, and it's all being scrambled. So, what are the tariffs actually targeting? Who stands to lose the most? And is this really economic patriotism, or just a geopolitical game that spiraled out of control? Here's what we know. Trump's new tariffs hit at the heart of the U.S.-China tech supply chain, and companies that depend on Chinese manufacturing and components, especially in semiconductors and electronics, are suddenly facing cost explosions, production delays, and vanishing investor confidence. And here's the kicker. This could just be the beginning. Whether you're a tech worker, a student, an investor, or just someone watching prices rise on every gadget you buy, this affects you. Because when tech breaks, the whole economy feels it. And it's not just about dollars and cents. Behind every drop in the market, there are layoffs, canceled projects, delayed launches, and a tech industry trying to figure out how to pivot mid-storm. So if you want to understand why these tariffs might trigger a tech recession, or even change the way innovation happens in the US for years to come, keep watching. Stick around. In the next few minutes, we'll break down the timeline, the industries, the reactions, and the fallout from a single move that erased hundreds of billions in value overnight, and may have just triggered the next global tech crisis. It all started with a tweet. No press conference, no signed law, just a tweet. 60% tariffs on Chinese tech. We must protect America's future. Within seconds, Wall Street flinched, and within hours, some of the world's most valuable tech stocks began to tumble, erasing over $200 billion in market value. Apple fell 8.7% in a single trading session. Nvidia, crowned just weeks ago as the king of the AI boom, plunged over 10%. Intel, AMD, even Tesla, everyone took a hit. The message was crystal clear. This wasn't a policy adjustment. This was an economic ambush. The shock wasn't just about the tariffs themselves. It was the surprise, the speed, the scope. No leaks, no briefings, not even a whisper. Analysts, CEOs, and markets were caught completely off guard. And what's worse, the tariffs hit directly where it hurt the most, the technology sector. This wasn't about soybeans or aluminum. This was microchips, circuit boards, batteries, robotics, everything that makes the modern world run. The timing was no coincidence either. The announcement coincided with leaked intelligence reports alleging Chinese tech companies were engaged in systematic data theft and backdoor surveillance in Western devices. National security hawks jumped on the opportunity. But investors saw something different. Chaos. The tech supply chain is one of the most globalized, interwoven systems on the planet. While iPhones may be designed in Cupertino, they're assembled in Shenzhen, tested in Chengdu, and shipped using ports and materials that span dozens of countries, many of which trace back to China. The same goes for almost every major piece of consumer and enterprise tech. Google servers, Meta's VR gear, Microsoft laptops, Nvidia's AI GPUs. Even the chips inside your car or smart fridge likely rely on Chinese inputs. Trump's tariff, effective immediately, slapped a 60% import tax on all of it. Overnight, companies were looking at massive cost increases, renegotiated supplier deals, and the potential collapse of just-in-time logistics. In just 3 days, the Nasdaq lost more than 6%. Dozens of hedge funds reallocated out of tech, fearing prolonged instability. VC firms froze capital. Startups began reporting investor pullouts mid-funding rounds. A few major product launches were postponed indefinitely. And beyond the financials, the real impact began surfacing. Halted hiring, supplier panic, and internal emergency meetings across Silicon Valley. Companies scrambled to find alternatives, but building a new supply chain can take years, not weeks. According to a J.P. Morgan report, over 90% of U.S. consumer electronics include at least one component sourced from or assembled in China. This makes the entire industry a direct target. And that's not even considering rare earth elements and precision tools needed for advanced chipmaking, fields where China still dominates. Even Taiwan's TSMC and South Korea's Samsung, the crown jewels of global semiconductor manufacturing, depend on Chinese materials and logistics networks. So these tariffs aren't just a US-China issue. They could destabilize the entire global tech ecosystem. But perhaps the most damaging blow wasn't tangible. It was psychological. After the 2018 to 2020 trade war, the tech sector had cautiously returned to growth, assuming the worst was behind them. That illusion just shattered. Suddenly, companies were forced to reprice risk, and investors began questioning if the tech boom was built on a foundation more fragile than they thought. The announcement lacked any roadmap, no end date, no benchmarks for rollback, no clarity on exceptions. It was an open-ended threat, and those are the ones markets fear the most. And when you combine fear, uncertainty, and high leverage in a $10 trillion sector, this is what happens. So to recap, one tweet triggered a global financial tremor. The tech sector lost hundreds of billions. Supply chains were thrown into disarray. Confidence cracked, and America's most powerful industry realized that it's not as bulletproof as it thought. So what exactly did Trump's administration hit with these new tariffs? Unlike earlier rounds of trade policy that focused on wide buckets like steel or autos, this time the scope is laser-focused. Technology. Not just gadgets, but the core machinery that powers the digital age. Semiconductors, circuit boards, batteries, sensors, and high-speed data components. The new tariffs apply a sweeping 60% import tax on over 1,200 specific product categories, most of which are tightly embedded within the global tech supply chain. These include microchips, lithium-ion battery cells, LED modules, 5G antennas, high-density memory, smart optical lenses, and even precision industrial robotics. This isn't just a tariff, it's a full-scale tech disruption. The economic equivalent of slamming the brakes on a speeding freight train. Nearly every company building smartphones, servers, autonomous vehicles, aerospace tech, or smart consumer devices is now facing a brutal cost spike overnight. For some, the math simply no longer works. Among the most impacted product lines, semiconductors and logic chips, used in everything from smartphones to missile systems. EV battery packs and control units, core to electric vehicle functionality and safety. 5G and fiber optic modules, critical for data centers, telecom, and edge computing. Display panels, camera modules, biometric sensors, integral to consumer tech and healthcare hardware. And it's not just electronics. These tariffs extend to industrial systems like robotic arms, AI-driven control units, clean room equipment, and high-precision diagnostic machines, vital across sectors like manufacturing, energy, biotech, and national defense. So why such an aggressive, all-at-once approach? Trump's economic advisors argue that this is a long-overdue correction. They frame it as a strategic shift toward tech sovereignty, ending American reliance on adversarial nations for critical digital infrastructure. In their eyes, the short-term disruption is worth it if it leads to greater independence, innovation, and national security. Supporters claim it's bold policy that finally matches the scale of the threat posed by foreign tech dominance. Some even call it a new Marshall Plan for American hardware, an inflection point for industrial revival. But critics warn it's reckless. They say it's a sledgehammer approach to a problem that demands a scalpel. Many U.S. firms were already diversifying their suppliers. This move disrupts even those efforts, and it punishes businesses that were making progress. CEOs and CFOs across the tech world are now revisiting forecasts, redoing product roadmaps, and initiating emergency procurement shifts. But rebuilding these relationships, especially with trusted Chinese suppliers, will not be easy or cheap. Adding to the pressure, China is reportedly preparing countermeasures. These include possible bans on rare earth exports, restrictions on software IP licenses, and new legal barriers for U.S. firms operating in Chinese markets. Rare earths, in particular, are crucial. They're used in chipmaking, magnets, defense systems, and energy storage. Without them, even non-Chinese suppliers face bottlenecks that ripple out across multiple sectors. Meanwhile, Washington is facing intense lobbying from industry giants who argue that the timeline is simply unworkable. Even those who support decoupling acknowledge that the infrastructure to reshore production just doesn't exist yet, and won't for years. For consumers, the effects will be clear: higher prices on electronics, fewer product launches, and reduced access to next-gen technologies. For smaller companies, the fallout could mean layoffs, stalled R&D, or even bankruptcy. The intent behind these tariffs might be independence and leverage, but the immediate result is uncertainty, disruption, and fragmentation across a tech industry that thrives on speed, scale, and stability. And the longer this uncertainty lasts, the more difficult recovery becomes. To understand why these tariffs are so devastating to the tech sector, you have to look beneath the surface, into the systems and supply chains that most people never think about. Because when we say the tech industry runs on global parts, we're not exaggerating. A single smartphone might require components from over 40 different suppliers across 20 countries. Miss just one of those parts, and the entire production line stops. Let's take semiconductors, arguably the most critical component in the modern world. Chips power everything: phones, laptops, cars, medical devices, satellites, even household appliances. And while the U.S. designs some of the most advanced chips on the planet, it no longer builds them at scale. Over 90% of high-end semiconductor manufacturing happens in Asia, especially Taiwan, South Korea, and China. But China plays a special role. It's the go-to hub for packaging, assembly, and testing. In other words, even if you make the chip in the U.S., chances are it still goes through China before it ends up in a product. Now, imagine adding a 60% tariff to that part of the chain. That's not just a price increase. It's a bottleneck that affects everything downstream. Orders get delayed. Launch schedules collapse. Engineering teams go into overdrive to redesign around missing components. Margins shrink, and investors panic. And that's just chips. Let's talk AI. Right now, AI systems are booming. Chatbots, smart assistants, machine learning in finance, healthcare, logistics. And what powers AI? Specialized hardware, GPUs, neural processing units, custom accelerators. NVIDIA is the global leader here. But guess what? Many of the components used in NVIDIA's AI hardware are assembled or sourced from China. These aren't easily swappable. Replacing a key optical connector or high-efficiency memory module takes months of testing and millions in R&D. The result? AI companies now face higher hardware costs, longer wait times, and in some cases, total redesigns. Startups trying to train models may have to pause for months. Cloud providers are already rationing GPU access. The AI revolution just hit a wall. And then there's the battery crisis. The shift to electric vehicles, grid storage, and portable electronics has created a massive demand for lithium-ion cells. While raw lithium can come from places like Australia or Chile, much of the processing and refinement happens in China. And so do the advanced components: separators, cathodes, precision controllers. Tesla, Ford, Rivian, they're all impacted. So are drone manufacturers, robotics firms, and green energy startups. These tariffs hit them right where it hurts: in speed, scale, and cost. Let's not forget about medical tech. Devices like ventilators, diagnostics machines, wearable monitors, even insulin pumps use smart components now. Many of them are imported from China. With the new tariffs, hospitals are seeing price jumps, and some procurement contracts are in limbo. And this isn't just about supply chains. It's also about human capital. Engineers who once focused on building new products are now scrambling to find component alternatives, redo board layouts, and reprogram firmware for different chips. Every hour spent re-engineering a workaround is an hour not spent innovating. Entire product cycles are now being replanned. That means fewer launches, slower innovation, and, ultimately, a lost edge in the global race for tech leadership. Then comes the psychological toll. For years, tech companies believed they were somewhat immune to geopolitical shocks. These tariffs shattered that illusion. CEOs are warning investors of unprecedented volatility. Venture capital is tightening. Startups with global ambitions are now being told to focus on surviving, not scaling. And as confidence dips, so does ambition. The move fast and break things mindset is being replaced by wait and see. Behind closed doors, industry insiders are calling this a systemic reset. Legacy companies are being forced to shelve next-gen innovations. Smaller players are folding. And universities reliant on tech grants are seeing funding dry up. Meanwhile, major corporations are diverting resources from R&D into legal teams and trade analysts just to interpret compliance risks. Innovation isn't just stalling, it's being redirected. Finally, there's the risk of fragmentation. If the US and China fully decouple, the tech world could split in two. Two competing ecosystems, two sets of standards, two internets. That's not just bad for business, it's bad for progress. Imagine a world where your phone can't connect to international apps, or where your favorite software has two incompatible versions. One for the West, one for the East. It slows everything down, it breaks interoperability, and it puts a massive ceiling on what's possible. These tariffs aren't just taxes, they're tremors shaking the foundation of the most important industry in the modern world. Not everyone loses in a crisis. When $200 billion disappears, it doesn't vanish into thin air, it shifts. So while the US tech sector is absorbing a historic blow, others are quietly positioning themselves to benefit. Let's start with the losers, because they're easier to spot. Big tech in the US is taking a direct hit. Apple, Nvidia, Intel, Qualcomm, AMD. These are the companies most exposed to global supply chains and most reliant on Chinese production. Their margins just got crushed. Startups? Even worse. While giants can afford short-term pain and have the capital to explore alternatives, smaller companies don't have that luxury. A 60% hike on key components can be fatal for a business with slim cash flow and tight burn rates. Early-stage AI, robotics, and hardware startups are already reporting funding freezes. Then there's the consumer. Prices are going up, fast. Laptops, phones, tablets, smartwatches, game consoles. Every product that relies on chips, batteries, displays, or sensors will feel the heat. Not immediately, but over the next few months, as inventory runs out and new batches come in with higher costs. And don't forget tech workers. With product delays, budget freezes, and investor anxiety, some companies are already pausing hiring or quietly laying off staff. Engineering departments are being restructured, supply chain roles are being overwhelmed, and morale is dropping. On a global level, countries heavily tied to US-China tech trade are feeling turbulence. Taiwan's TSMC, South Korea's Samsung, and SK Hynix all rely on US clients and Chinese logistics. The tariffs don't just affect US imports, they disrupt the entire network. But now let's talk winners, because there are some, and they're moving quickly. First, India. For years, India has been trying to establish itself as the next big tech manufacturing hub. With US companies looking to shift out of China, India's low labor costs, English-speaking talent pool, and growing factory infrastructure make it a prime alternative. Apple has already ramped up iPhone production in India. Expect more deals fast. Second, Vietnam and Mexico. These two countries have become key nodes in the China Plus One strategy, where companies keep some operations in China, but diversify to other nations. Vietnam is booming with electronics assembly. Mexico benefits from proximity to the US and favorable trade agreements. Third, European manufacturers. Companies in Germany, the Netherlands, and France that produce niche components like optics, industrial sensors, or precision tools, are seeing increased demand as buyers look for non-Chinese sources. Fourth, domestic U.S. manufacturers in the long term. Firms like Intel and GlobalFoundries are getting subsidies to build chip plants on American soil. While it'll take years, this could eventually create a U.S.-based ecosystem for advanced tech production. If, and only if, the government follows through on investment. Investors are also repositioning. Funds are shifting money out of overexposed tech giants and into smaller firms in supply chain infrastructure, automation, and rare earth mining. If you're in the business of building alternatives to China, you've suddenly become very valuable. But even for the winners, the road ahead is complicated. India's infrastructure isn't ready for the same volume and speed as China's. Vietnam is facing energy shortages and labor constraints. Mexico has political friction with the U.S. over trade and security. And American manufacturers still face talent shortages, high costs, and regulatory red tape. So yes, some will gain. But they'll also be tested. Because replacing China isn't as simple as finding a cheaper country. It means rebuilding relationships, scaling capacity, and dealing with a fragmented, volatile world market. In the end, the biggest loser might be efficiency. For decades, tech companies have relied on just-in-time production, low costs, and global reach. These tariffs force a shift toward redundancy, higher inventories, and regionalism. That means more buffers, more expense, and less agility. The system that built trillion-dollar tech giants is cracking, and while some may thrive in the chaos, most are simply trying to survive it. The fallout from Trump's tariffs isn't staying inside U.S. borders. It's already triggering a wave of international reactions, some strategic, some retaliatory, and all deeply consequential. Let's start with the obvious: China. Within 48 hours of the tariff announcement, Chinese officials held an emergency press conference. While they didn't announce immediate countermeasures, they made it crystal clear. Retaliation is coming. Leaks from within China's Ministry of Commerce suggest several options are on the table. The most likely? Export controls on rare earth elements, critical materials used in everything from chips to electric vehicles to fighter jets. China controls over 70% of the global supply. Cutting that off would send shockwaves through every advanced tech sector. Another possibility: targeting U.S. tech companies operating in China. Apple, Tesla, Intel, and Microsoft all have massive market exposure there. And while the Chinese government hasn't made any moves yet, regulators could slow down permits, raise inspection hurdles, or launch security audits that function like soft sanctions. Then there's the risk of a digital iron curtain. With tech supply chains fracturing, both countries may accelerate efforts to build parallel ecosystems. China already has its own app stores, cloud infrastructure, and chip-making projects. These new tariffs may turbocharge Beijing's push for tech independence and cut off Western companies in the process. But it's not just China that's responding. The European Union is watching closely. While EU officials haven't picked a side, they've voiced concern over unilateral economic disruptions and signaled that if the US and China escalate, European industry could get caught in the middle. Companies like ASML in the Netherlands, which produce cutting-edge chip-making equipment, face a tough choice: follow U.S. restrictions or risk losing access to Asian clients. Meanwhile, Germany, France, and Italy are scrambling to assess exposure in automotive electronics and green energy tech, two areas highly dependent on Chinese parts. Japan and South Korea, longtime allies of the U.S., are also on edge. Both countries rely on stable trade with both China and the U.S. Japanese automakers like Toyota and Sony, and Korean giants like Samsung and LG could suffer collateral damage. Already, South Korea's Ministry of Trade has begun convening emergency panels to evaluate strategic stockpiles and alternative suppliers. India, interestingly, is trying to walk a tightrope. On one hand, it stands to benefit from companies fleeing China. On the other, it doesn't want to alienate Beijing or overcommit to Washington. Prime Minister Modi has emphasized a multi-aligned strategy, keeping doors open to both sides while fast-tracking investment in domestic infrastructure. The World Trade Organization has been notably quiet, but behind the scenes, there's a flurry of concern. Several nations are reportedly preparing formal complaints against both the US and China, arguing that escalating tariffs violate trade norms. But with the WTO already weakened by years of political deadlock, few expect real enforcement. Economists are calling this the beginning of a global supply chain recalibration. Central banks in Southeast Asia are modeling potential shocks. Multinational corporations are reassessing where they build, hire, and innovate. And freight routes, from the ports of Singapore to the Mexican border, are already seeing unusual volume swings. Some analysts believe we're entering a new Cold War, not over ideology, but over chips, code, and data. This isn't about tanks and missiles. It's about server racks, satellite bandwidth, quantum processors, and AI clusters. And the more national governments insert themselves into corporate logistics, the more volatile and politicized innovation becomes. What used to be a global interconnected ecosystem is beginning to splinter. And once those splits widen, they're hard to close. What's next? No one knows for sure. But every country is bracing for turbulence. It's a question no one wanted to ask, but now everyone is. Are we entering Cold War 2.0? Not the kind with nuclear standoffs and ideological blocks, but a Cold War of data, chips, supply chains, and economic dominance. And the parallels are becoming impossible to ignore. Let's go back to history for a second. During the First Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union competed for global supremacy through arms, ideology, and alliances. It wasn't about open warfare. It was about influence, control, and the ability to project power without firing a shot. Today, replace missiles with microchips. Replace tanks with AI. Replace spy satellites with smartphone sensors. This is a war for technological sovereignty, and it's being fought with tariffs, restrictions, and trade routes instead of weapons. Trump's new tech tariffs aren't just economic tools. They're part of a larger strategic playbook. Weaken your rival's ability to compete and force the world to pick sides. China, in turn, has responded with its own version of soft deterrence, building self-reliance in semiconductors, launching Made in China 2025, and extending its influence through digital infrastructure like 5G, cloud services, and smart cities in emerging markets. The battleground isn't just Washington and Beijing, it's Lagos, Jakarta, São Paulo. Wherever countries are deciding whose hardware to buy, whose data laws to follow, and whose cloud to use, that's where this war is being waged. The scary part, most of the world is caught in the middle. Nations are being pressured to pick sides, not just diplomatically, but economically. Signing a trade deal with the US might mean cutting ties with Chinese suppliers. Accepting Huawei's 5G tech might mean losing access to Western software updates. There's no neutral zone anymore. And unlike the Cold War of the 20th century, this isn't happening in slow motion. It's fast, it's digital, it's recursive. Every new escalation triggers a real-time reaction on markets, on data flows, and on manufacturing pipelines. Corporations are feeling this too. American firms are being pushed to decouple from Chinese tech, even if it costs billions. Chinese firms are investing in local alternatives to US chips, operating systems, and cloud platforms. This isn't just economic friction, it's full-spectrum technological separation. What's especially dangerous is that there's no clear doctrine. In the old Cold War, both sides had rules, red lines, back channels. Today, the escalation path is murky. A tariff leads to a ban leads to sanctions, a sanction leads to retaliatory arrests. We've already seen tit-for-tat detentions of tech executives, bans on entire platforms, and sweeping blacklists. And it's not just the big players. Smaller nations, tech startups, researchers, even app developers are getting caught in the crossfire. A single export restriction can invalidate years of work. A single regulation change can bankrupt a platform. Some analysts argue that the goal isn't to start a war, but to create friction, to slow down the rival, not destroy them. In that sense, tariffs are less about economics and more about tempo, speed bumps in the other side's innovation highway. But if the goal is containment, the risk is overreach. Overuse of tariffs, bans, and tech sanctions could backfire. Allies may start to view the US as unpredictable. Neutral partners may seek third ways. And China, if pushed too far, could accelerate decoupling in a way that damages everyone, including itself. There's also a risk of infrastructure fragmentation. If the internet itself begins to split, if data can't flow freely, if software stacks diverge, if encryption standards become nationalized, we could end up with two digital worlds that don't talk to each other. That's not just bad for business. It's a threat to innovation, to collaboration, and to the very idea of a global tech ecosystem. The Cold War 2.0 isn't coming. It's already here. The only question now is whether it spirals, or whether someone hits pause before the divide becomes permanent. After all the damage, all the fallout, all the global tension, what actually happens next? That's the billion-dollar question. Economists and trade experts are split. Some believe these tariffs are a high-stakes bargaining tactic, a political weapon aimed at pressuring China back to the table. In this version of the story, Trump escalates quickly, then de-escalates just as fast in exchange for concessions or a new tech agreement. But others warn that this time feels different. Unlike past trade wars, this one hits strategic industries, not soybeans or cars, but the backbone of modern technology. There's less room to compromise, more pressure to double down, and neither side wants to appear weak. In the short term, businesses are bracing for uncertainty. Procurement teams are redrawing contracts. Chief financial officers are modeling cost increases. Venture capital is slowing, especially in hardware-heavy startups. And Wall Street is still jittery, with tech stocks showing elevated volatility weeks after the announcement. In Washington, lobbying pressure is surging. Industry groups are urging lawmakers to delay implementation or provide carve-outs. Some senators are calling for congressional oversight. Others are backing Trump, framing this as a necessary step to restore American dominance. Meanwhile, China is playing the long game. Analysts believe Beijing will wait, observe, and retaliate surgically, likely in areas where U.S. companies are vulnerable, but where China doesn't hurt its own economy too much. And behind the scenes, talks are happening. Quiet meetings, diplomatic back channels, supply chain triage. Everyone wants to avoid a full collapse, but no one wants to blink first. For everyday people, the impact may not be immediate, but it's coming. Devices will get more expensive. Product launches will be delayed. Companies may slow hiring or trim teams to manage rising costs, and innovation could take a backseat as the industry shifts to survival mode. The tech sector thrives on speed, clarity, and scalability. Tariffs bring confusion, hesitation, and fragmentation. If the conflict stretches out, the consequences could last for years. And if global supply chains are forced to fully reconfigure, moving away from China, sourcing from dozens of new locations, it could take a decade to stabilize. In the meantime, markets will remain volatile, pricing unpredictable, and innovation slowed. The next few months will be critical. Whether this conflict escalates or cools down will depend not just on trade, but on politics, public opinion, and how the market reacts. One thing is clear: the era of frictionless global tech may be over. $200 billion didn't just vanish overnight. It sent a signal, a warning shot, a wake-up call. Proof that in today's world, one political decision can disrupt the global tech industry, shake financial markets, and fracture supply chains that took decades to build. What started as a tariff headline is now evolving into a global power struggle, and behind the graphs and headlines are real consequences. Rising prices, job uncertainty, delayed products, and a digital future that's being redrawn in real time. The age of seamless globalization may be ending. What replaces it is still unknown. A new tech Cold War? A fractured internet? Or maybe a push toward real independence and resilience if companies and countries can adapt in time. One thing is clear: technology is no longer neutral. It's political, it's strategic, and it's at the center of the next big conflict, not with weapons, but with wires, data, and code. So where does that leave you? Whether you're a developer, an entrepreneur, an investor, or just someone who relies on tech every day, this story affects you. The phone in your hand, the apps you use, the services you depend on, the companies you follow. None of them are insulated from this shift. That's why it's more important than ever to stay informed, to understand not just how tech works, but how tech power works and who controls it. If you found this video helpful, thought-provoking, or even a little unsettling, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We're diving deep into the stories that shape the future, so you're always a step ahead. And let us know in the comments, do you think these tariffs are a smart move or a dangerous gamble? We read every single one. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next one.